Olá.
Hello again. First of all, I want to thank you for staying so long. It was a very full day, a day full of emotions. The thing is, when we start talking about diversity and inclusion and equity, we're talking about people. People's identity, people's experiences. And that is really why I thought it was important when we were dreaming up this conference to bring a great variety of people and experiences to this stage. And so what we're doing today is just a drop in the ocean. My suggestion is that the confrontations that exist this afternoon should be seen as something constructive. That is, there is a need to discuss these topics even more and in greater depth. And we as organizations, as people, and we forget that companies and organizations are people, we have this responsibility. Now, having said that, and I think that we're a little tired, I want to increase the energy before we have the last keynote speaker. That's why I launched the challenge, stand up. If it's not a great sacrifice, stand up. I promise you, you're going to sit down very quickly.
E atendendo que estão de pé.
And given the fact that you're standing, in order to refresh our energies, I'm going to ask questions and make some statements. And if any of you identify with the questions or statements I'm going to make, then you can sit down and keep seated. So the first question I'm going to ask is, if you ever felt that your accent was a barrier and you suffer discrimination because of this. If this ever happened to your life, sit down.
Se alguma vez.
If you ever suffered from discrimination, bias, you felt different because of the color of your skin, sit down. If you ever at school or university, work, group of friends, you felt that you were ever in this, if you ever suffered from harassment, please sit down. If you ever felt that your religion, your spirituality, your belief was a motive of discomfort, where if ever your gender was a barrier to progress or be successful, please sit down. If you ever felt that your family planning, that is to have children, was something that was going to prevent you from reaching professional success, please sit down. So if you ever felt that your sexual orientation or gender identity was something that prevents you from being successful, please sit down. And now, those of you who are still standing, look round and look at each other. The reality is that, curiously, which is not normal, I see more women than men. It's not for good it's not for good reasons, because the public is much is made up of many more women than men. That is, I talk about questions and experiences. I could carry on with more questions, but this shows that our experiences, and I didn't I didn't ask questions about geography or your economic situation. I see that the number of people that stand up in a room, remain standing in a room, is very small, very male, and very similar. And so when we talk about diversities and inclusion, we have to talk about these questions: the lack of diversity and exclusion. And this happens on an everyday basis. And this happens because quite often we are not aware that our reality is not the truth, but it's the truth for us, but not the absolute truth for the rest of the world. And there are different ways to see the same reality, and it's part. And this is not negative. On the contrary, it should be celebrated. And we as a society have to maintain this commitment to dialogue with those who think differently from us. Having said this, can be said down? Yes, that's the lady. So you think there's some kind of scourge that you have to stand up? No. This final keynote speech, I have to give you some context. Since very young, I was involved in the LGBT movement when I started my own student movement for the implementation of sexual education at school. This was in 2006. That was translated in the law of 2009 that implemented the sexual education at school for the first time. I created my own NGO. I've created 3 linked to LGBT. And so this was always something very important for me, and something that I had the privilege of managing to create empathy with other communities, and the fact that as a youngster I felt the invisible barrier, that my voice was tolerated but not heard. So this idea that we have to hear youngsters, but not that much. We can't give them power. And I, as an ex-curator of the World Global Shapers, to the World Economic Forum to July this year, I know how important it is to give youngsters a voice, not because they know everything, or they're going to be the leaders of the future, because we have to bring new perspectives. And so the keynote that I bring you today is a young woman, 19-year-old, who's come directly from São Paulo and created the Black Girl Institute. And she's going to talk about these questions of emancipation, and not only, but then we will have a conversation between us about this wonderful presentation. A round of applause to Isabelle Christina, who I would like to thank for having invited the invitation. Good evening, everybody. First of all, it's a great pleasure to be here with you all, and I hope this will be a conversation because to talk about transforming worlds, we have to know what the world is for each person here and the dialogues that can be created. And so, first of all, that's me. I'm Brazilian. I'm almost 20, so I'm talking to you. And so there's 1 month to go before the crisis, the 20-year crisis. I work in MUDAR, which is a technological company, and a business manager. And I started the Institute of Black Girl Institute. In addition to this, I'm part of a global network which is called Shocker, which is a young change maker, which for youngsters up to the age of 21 that have the social network. And in Brazil in 2020 a program was launched which is called A Million Opportunities, which is part of the Generation Unlimited Unicef. And so I am part of this program as ambassador in Brazil. So tell you a little about the main ideas throughout this conversation. The first thing is to talk a little bit about what the world is. What do we understand what the world is? How do we see this reality as a consequence of how it was created and experiences, our experiences. Then we're going to dialogue a little bit about this experiences within this concept of humanity, which was created politically. Now this is influenced our lives, and then I'm going to talk to tell you a little bit about how this overlapping of worlds that we all know, how it's important and relevant, that is all these different parallel worlds, so that together we can find a common path. And then my world, that is the world belongs to each one here, from an economic and social political perspective, we can have a look at this. And then I would like to by being provocative, so everybody can think how they can be a transformer. So to begin, we talk about the concept of the world. My vision, I would like to ask you what you understand as the world. So what is the world for you? There's no right or wrong answers. You can feel completely at ease when I talk about the world. I'd like to hear what you think. Mankind, diversity, living together, scale. Anybody else? Community. Good. With these few words, we've already understand that when we talk about the world,
isso, a perspectiva de vida.
Associate this with the perspective of life. That's how we understand life, the mutual living together. And so we have to understand this concept of life within what we understand as the world. And so we talk about the perspective of the life and the society we live in, the space and society. We have a trend to understand life as with a finite. We are born, we grow, we get old, we die. And so there has to be social protocols. We're going to study, we're going to faculty, then we're going to work, and then there's productivity, you have a family, and then so we think things are very right. Why am I talking about our culture? Because we look at other cultures, because the sense of life is much more profound. Brazil has it was indigenous territory. The perception of life for them goes much beyond this idea of a body and identity. They need a body which is associated with an identity. If I lose this identity, then I don't have enough life, and so they have got much more, many more lives, and what has been, which is different. So we have to think about the lives in the mountains, the oceans, the atmosphere, and outside the atmosphere. We lose this perspective because we are focused on the models operandi of our society, and so we need to do this, and we need to make this protocol, and so we're left with a very finite perspective of our perspectives of change and the worlds we live in. So what actually happens is the effect of the bubble effect, that is to create bubbles in the world. And here is an indigenous thinker in Brazil who talks about this civilization, that is, we are focused so much on on whether it's right or wrong within a pattern that was politically defined over years, many years, that we end up living in this abstraction, and we aren't aware of anything outside my reality, anything outside what I know. And this is the main provocation for us to begin to talk about transforming world. So, and that is the world. If we have the ability to create narratives in the world, the world wasn't created in a day, and so the world is created every day. And so if we have this ability to create worlds, and then we can have the ability to create new forms of reaching them all. And this is the first point, the first starting point to discuss all these questions. And so why am I bringing this provocation of experiences within the concept of humanity? I'm going to ask, what do you understand as mankind? Very simple question. So what do you understand by humanity or mankind? Were the first words that come into your mind? Empathy, global community, rights. Now, all these words that you mentioned should be attributed to then this concept of humanity. But now, if we look at our society today, when we talk about humanity and we look at the world today, we can understand that we don't have no guarantee of rights or guarantee of this global community. And many people do not have access to internet, which is a human right today. And so we question what is this scenario of mankind, that is how people interact. And so it's found it interesting to say that we can say that who can consider that a great part of the population lives in a scenario of subhumanity because they do not have access to what should be minimally guaranteed for them to be able to live a life that would guarantee rights. And she had brought a reference of a book, some Brazilian who's called Nilza Souza. She's Souza Santos, she's a psychiatrist and talks about the role of the black people in I was born black. But to talking about society, when we stop to think about the role of the black person, we assume an identity within a bigger concept, which is the colonizing concept. When the Portuguese went to colonize Brazil, and it became the white European in the sense of all this, and so those who were born black had to be in agreement with what was considered correct, and so everybody questions this identity, as we were saying, these alienated realities. If you ask somebody from the periphery who has no perspectives outside his own reality, I hear this: I want to be a baker. I want to work as a carpenter. That's the people who don't know the reality. On the other hand, you can ask people who have got more access, as that is, that they want to be. It can be very different. You can say, I want to be a doctor, and journalist, and so there's a great disparity from this field of social constructed identity. Why am I talking about this a lot? I bring another philosophy, and so he's a great Brazilian thinker who reflects on the global scenario. So he said, and this is the role of racism that I'm talking about, because it's a field which has got to do with my history, how this has affected and how this created the Black Girl Institute. And so he talks about the structural racism, when we can sometimes people think racism is just something that happens occasionally. But you have to look at racism as a structure. Institutes operate in a scenario that is been built socially. So if we stop to think, because in the companies in Brazil, they have 0.4% of black women. So when I look at young apprentices in Brazil, is most of the young, most of them are black. So the first, and so what are the barriers that began to appear? And we also question the role of meritocracy and access. What is access? Which makes these people have a successful career or not? So these are questions that we look at carefully, and we need to have this structural perspective of the problem, and not an occasional reality. And so to talk a little bit of this scenario and talk about the reality of Brazil today, and to understand a little bit of my history and how I brought picture, which is quite controversial, which reflects what Brazil is today and how it was built up and so in 1500, the three caravels went to discover Brazil, and so from there they started to bring civilization to humanity to a Brazilian territory, and then with slaves, and they constructed this Brazilian society, and with miscegenation in the middle of it all. And so here this painting, it was very symptomatic, and so those who want to contribute here to try and also, when you look at this painting, what can you understand? Here is a black woman. So it was a person who came from this process of slavery, who brought the blacks from Africa and Brazil. Here is probably Portuguese who came to Brazil, because there was a number of colonies in Brazil, and some handed over to people from here, and then the daughter of that person, and this is this woman's son. So if you look at this, what do you feel with this? What perception? And then I'll go into detail a little bit more. No mic, no interpretation.
Também? Sim. Que mais? Eu vou dar
Here, I'm going to give you an important detail. You can understand here. This is we have an asphalt part of the ground, and then the other part is just soil.
A minha perspectiva é que
So my perspective is, first of all, the oldest person is the blackest person, and it seems that the other generations are becoming whiter and whiter, and then the context of the invisible context of the painting, that is the black woman is barefoot, and then the white man has got Western clothes. He's got shoes on, and the baby, if it's her daughter, what is she's so white. So it was quite strange. Thank you very much for your contribution, Mike. What my colleague said, and I think the black woman is thanking the fact that her grandson was born white, so she doesn't have to suffer everything that she did. Yeah, well, that looks like it. You've already talked about miscegenation, where the prevalence is about white culture, which continues in power, and it is so it takes over what already exists in the territory, and so that's the difference of you call their attention to it. I hadn't noticed. Thank you very much. And that is the road, so that is a road forward, and the earth is mud, earth and mud, and that's where the roots are. That's my interpretation. Thank you very much. Well, I think that it reminds us of the theory of, I don't remember the name, of the Cinzala, Brazil. There was a big house and the outhouse, and so it's, they are all living together, and it's an example of conviviality. And so this theory is has got to do with the idea that everybody in Brazil There's a lot of mestizos, but everybody gets on well and they live well, which is probably not the case. It's got to do with something you said a while ago, and when you talked about colonization, and then you talked about decolonization, which is the case of the process of regaining your original identity. Then there's another painting after this. No, we are working on this recovery of identity. I think that's what you were saying before. And it's important conversation. So all the points that were raised are right. May I? I have my own interpretation. Can I say it? Yes. The question of the look, the chivalrous look or gaze of the man to the kid, and so the baby has got nothing to do with the woman's family. She's looking at the black woman, and so this coincidence of gaze is interesting. She's pointing at the black woman, and the baby is. So the white man is looking in a superior way, and that's exactly it. So everything that you talked about is a representation of pride that comes from all the hot points you mentioned, because in Brazilian, in the specific, there was a policy of the whitening of the populations after the abolition of slavery. The blacks said you are free, but you don't have a house, you don't have a car, you have nothing, but you can't be left outside because if we find you, you're going to be arrested. And this is what happened. And so the rate of blacks in the labour market was almost nothing because there was the beggars and homeless policy. When we found a free slave, he was arrested, and so there was a great movement to bring European immigrants from Portugal, from Spain, and so from all countries around to whiten Brazil, because they understood that this was that Brazil was a successful country, and so this was the policy of the whitening policy, and so these are the roots of Brazil, and so we see the consequences of this up to today. And so why did I talk about it? First of all, to understand a little bit about the context.
No meio disso tudo, porque ainda é muito sintomático isso.
This is very present in the daily life, in organizations, society at large. Talking about overlapping of coexisting worlds, you have to base upon our own social reality with these mix of races. There is a myth of the harmony of races. There is the concept of harmony between races. We're all the same, we all get along very well, so there are no differences between people, between different colors, different ethnic groups. Many people believe this, including black people, so this is perpetuated. We don't really understand why this came to be. Now these questions are being put now. I have a picture to talk about overlapping of worlds. Here I am. This is the reality I've always lived in my whole life. Ever since I was a small child, I lived in a very peripheral context, in the most vulnerable district of São Paulo, but my mother had undergone very prejudice in the labor market because she was a black woman. She prepared in a military regime. She was very rigorous in my education so as to have access to these opportunities. So I had access to scholarships. that allowed me to be in very different places from where I started. This is my reality. I was the only black girl, so I started questioning myself, like, why am I the only one? Always. Why am I here and my neighbor is not here? What is special about me that the others don't? What were the reasons why I'm here? So, this exchange was the drop of water. I don't know what we're going to do, but something has to be done to change this reality. So this is my story. I was raised by my mother here in the middle. You must do things locally, and so what you expect is what you do is what you were expected as a black woman in the Brazilian society. So you have to understand how to move on, because in Brazil it's basically in Brazil for a black woman is just to be a cleaning lady. So, in primary school, you go to schools and there are no classes. So in the most peripheral neighborhoods, it's a completely forgotten population. This is most of the young people in Brazil are in the peripheral regions where there is no access, there is no information, there is no quality education, so the job opportunities which will create conditions for them to change reality do not get there. So I had this good access. I won scholarships for private schools. There's a moment in my life which I really, when I was 11 years old, I lived in the periphery. I moved into São Paulo, and one fine day my mother discovered a social project which gave scholarships to the best schools at São Paulo, where children of politicians were studying. But everybody who came out of that school had the best possible opportunities, career opportunities for the universities. So she took me to school, and I said, wow, it looks like Disney, so different. It looked like a United States, like a high school musical. So we got to know the school and said, would you like to be here? Yes. Are you going to pay? You didn't have money. We were living in extreme poverty, and we're living in another person's house because the situation is very bad. So we're going to try and get a scholarship. So I went around the school, I talked with the dean, you don't have scholarship in this school. So my mother was quite insisting. She showed my certificate of the best student. So the reply was there were no scholarships. But my mother said, we'll be back tomorrow. So there are no scholarships, let's go into another school that will return. Well, the director of this program of scholarships called my mother. My school contact me, and we give scholarships for students to participate. He has to live and study in São Paulo. And my mother asked me, "This is what you'd like?" Yes, it's the best opportunity I could have. If I study here, good things are going to happen. This is all on Wednesday. On Friday, my mother rented a house in a very ugly place. Extreme violence all around it. But it was the cheapest place, and we really needed to move to be able to enroll and to pass the test. I participated. We had a scholarship guarantee until the end of middle school. I tried to get this other scholarship, and things went right. And it would have been terrible because we gave up everything in the other city. we lived in terrible conditions. We just took 2 backpacks. And they said, I have 2 mattresses. I see that you didn't bring any furniture. Do you want 2 mattresses? Yes. So my mother lived on the wooden part of the bed, and I slept on the mattress. This was a reality for some time until we were able to get some social support. Why am I telling you this? Because today, when I tell my story, people look at me and say, well, Isabelle made it. She works, she created an NGO, but it was the result of a story that shouldn't have happened. This negative part of my story should not have been happened, because I should have had guaranteed in Grajaú, where the boy says he would like to be a baker, he should have the same type of education I had. So in this school, it was surreal, because I started to study with the children of ministers, politicians, presidents, the most important doctors in the country. Everybody is here, and I still see my colleagues, which is working as a nanny, to be able to earn 1,000 real, which is nothing. So I began to feel a bit uncomfortable. When I was 13 years, I was on the first exchange with the United States. This was the biggest dream at the time. This is when I decided that I would be doing something different, and together with my mother, we had the idea of the project Black Girls. I'm a black girl, so I'm going to teach how the other girls could follow me. So we put together 10 girls to mentor them, to tutor them, focusing on 3 aspects: professional, academic, component, and cultural. It's a tripod to develop their potential. Based upon these 10 girls we worked with, we started getting very good results. So the girl who was a nanny came to us. She started to, the companies have started discussing diversity and inclusion. We participate in events. People got to know this project, so open space to have joint programs, and the results showed up. This girl who was a nanny started working in IBM. Another girl he was completely illiterate, she was working in another big company. And this started calling the attention in our community. The project grew a great deal. As a result of this joint work, I was a member of ASHOC, the network of young entrepreneurs, to promote these projects. One of the companies we've always worked with, which is Oracle, Get to Know Me, we started working together on diversity in 2018. I was invited to start working there as a young trainee to bring diversity inside the company. So this really has widened my scope of action, and I had a greater possibility of leveraging my institute. So many things happened in my life. I have the opportunity of participating in several global initiatives to empower young people. We created a platform together with Facebook to teach other young people how they can become transformation agents. And many things started happening. I had the chance of participating in the Peace Nobel Laureates Conference. I went to the United Nations to launch this project. So this is a story of a black girl in the peripheries, which created an NGO, increasing dimension. So other pictures. Recently, I was here in the Estoril conferences to talk about this project, which has become an institute. Why? Why am I telling you this? Because the idea of local action and global thought is true. We started being able to transform many young people. These are some of the young people who are members of our institution. And our goal is to empower these people, giving them conditions to develop professionally, academically and culturally to make them join the labor market. I have a very short video, 2 minutes, which tells the story. It's only 2019, but tells us the basics. The girls in the video are part of the first classroom. We have 120 young people, and the numbers are growing.
Desde muito pequena, eu comecei a...
I was in a completely different atmosphere where I was born, and I started to realize that I was one of the only black girls everywhere I went. And this was very upsetting, and I started thinking, what could I do to change this reality? My name is Isabelle, I'm 16 years old, and I founded the project Black Girls. We want to fight gender and racial inequality in the world, in Brazil and in the world. I face great difficulties to join the labor market. In view of the social issue, I prepared my daughter so that she could choose the work, she could choose the school, what she wanted to make of her life. So when she had this idea of the social project, I realized that she was 13 years old and she wanted to create a social project. So this project has a role of empowering girls to see their own potential and to be able to attain their dreams, their goals, and become multiplying factors with developing activities such as mentorship, language classes, so that they are able to seize their opportunities.
Uma das maiores dificuldades para...
One of the biggest difficulties for young people is to understand what is happening around you and how you can change this. This was essential. This project does. Each girl can be the owner of her own life. It changed my life, and I can say this for sure. Everybody needs to dream big. You have to dream things that haven't happened so that they can take place in future. And if you follow a cause that you identify with, just not look around what is taking place. You should do something so that change should happen in the future. This is a video made by Shocker, and it tells the story of the social project I lead, so I'd like you to know the story of many other young people. They have a program, Lead Young. We have many young people doing incredible stuff, and it's all available on a Shocker portal so that you get some inspiration. I'd like to show you, so when we realize our own conception of the world and looking around us and overlapping these realities, we can obtain transforming results, not just for us, but for other peoples, when we realize what is our place in the world. So this is just a couple of scenarios from Brazil, a bit of statistic. When you look at data, we realize that all social indicators we've got show that black women are always at the basis of the social pyramid. So we really want to work with these girls who will become the women who will transform this reality. Besides black girls, we started working with young people in the peripheries, not just girls. Brazil, 56% of the population is black. Still, we have difficulties in working on race issues. At Bahia, where 80% of the population is black, they have quotas to hire black people. So it doesn't make sense, but this is Brazil's reality. So our goal is, by looking at this reality and the labor market, thinking how technology is changing society as a whole, where the the jobs we have today will not be there in a couple of years. 85% of these jobs in 2030 do not exist yet. And the future of labor, the young people in Brazil, most of the young people are in the peripheries. They do not even know about this. They do not know about digital transition. They do not know that companies are changing their business models and that they need skills and completely different competencies from the ones we know. So we were able to understand during the pandemic there's been an increase of social inequality because many young people have no access to education. If the public education is not good, imagine with us 2 years of not going to school. So we've seen that the way of transforming the life of these people is through productive inclusion into the labor market. This is the main cause, to give tools to these people to become the main actors of this wall of transformation and contribute in companies.
Então, esse é o Instituto Meninas Negras.
The Institute Black Girls, we work since 2017. Our mission is
A realidade
to transform the reality of these young people, to fight all types of inequalities through opportunities, focusing on 3 main points: education, entrepreneurship, and social empowerment. Why entrepreneurship? Because we live in a world of change. Entrepreneur is the one who can create solutions to a problem. It's not going to create a startup, but the entrepreneurial mentality to create solution for life, for society at large, is what we'd like them to have. And then start social empowerment to generate change.
porque o que
Especially in scale, because what we want to create is these people
onde elas nascem.
as active agents, leaders, main leaders. This is what's missing in the world, but in Brazil you don't see people in a leadership post, transform agents in order to solve the more critical problems of society. People have to create solutions together. And the citizens of the world, because at the end of the day we understand that when a person feels a part of the world as a whole, they can project and dream in order to achieve all objectives. And to conclude, I would like to invite you for a provocation. I think that all the world has a role to play in terms of transforming the world. You're not going to create, everybody's not going to create an NGO, but you can think of a reality, a context, a scenario. From this scenario, and that only each one of you know your own experiences, so we can manage to understand how to change this. And so this is a provocative. Who has hours about the future? Nobody. And so this is something that we should teach at schools. It's like of thinking the future exists. No, the future doesn't exist. The past doesn't exist. No, it doesn't exist either. We know it. It was recorded in books and art. So we know these records about what happened. But in order to think about the past doesn't exist and the future doesn't exist. And so when we think about creating worlds and transforming worlds and creating new narratives, and so we have to assume that the future doesn't exist and it's going to be the result of what we're going to create now. And so to teach the future, we want to colonize masts. But first of all, we have to colonize this future with promising ideas. What are the images that we are giving for my generation, for example? So if you ask today, to the youth, what they understand by the future, I mean, the future is going to be awful. They're going to be robots. The world is coming to an end. It's going to explode, and climate change. They only have negative views, and so these are the people who are going to be the leaders of the future. But we have to assume this ancestral role to try and understand that today my role, I'm talking about the older generation, but also me, this is a role where my younger cousin's going to occupy in a short time. And I must guarantee that what I'm creating today will be sustainable, and so that she can use the values that are going to be constructed over time. I think the main discussions that to talk about the future, equity, to belong into environments, this is finite vision that I talked at the beginning. So we only think within the bubble. We don't think of a macro vision. We have somebody has to transform this in order to give room to generations to work together, and to because we can do things differently, and so we have to create new spaces. And so I would just like to point out the power of the imaginary. So when we think about these new paths that are emerging, we have a number of scales. We know that a very small part of the world as a whole, but we can put a value and understand that there are certain things we don't know, but there's a great field out there that who don't know they don't know, and so that is where we must find out, because that's where the answers of the challenges that we have. But we're only going to be able to get into this place when there are the necessary dialogues take place, and so that is why we have to let our imaginary flow. And I brought a quote from the Dutch sociology. So the ascension, the fall of cultures were associated with positive images that were created, and so those were the decadent image, and so society didn't succeed. So, and why did I bring this for us, for the world? Is a chaos, we know that, but what is going to happen in the future depends a lot of the image that we want to build, and how we are going to get this to occur collectively. To conclude, we can say this. I want to do something for the world, but I don't know where to start, I don't know how it works, and so I wanted to bring an exercise for you to reflect. So part of this world, of people who transform, everybody is going to have their own answers. But an exercise that I wanted to bring in order to facilitate this process is and I always bring this tree, just if we stop and think about life as a tree, then we can have inner roots, personal values, which I believe in. This makes sense for me. And for personal values, we can think from about my yeses and my nos. I don't tolerate the fact that somebody has a prejudicial
Quais são os meus
ideas about me. So I have to think about what my yeses and nos are. And so we have personal values, and we have the leaves, which are passion, the things that I like to do, which makes my eyes shine. And so we can understand these two aspects of the trunk roots and leaves. We can connect them all, which is the objective, that is the purpose, that is what makes you understand your contribution, and necessarily talking about more ample scales, how you, through your own personal purpose, you can transform micro realities. How do we create this purpose? Because in the labour market today, many people talk about to find a purpose. We have to find a purpose. As if the purpose was there, it was lost under the table. But we create our purpose, and so through these individual reflections, we manage to find answers. So this is basically what I wanted to tell you today. I hope that each one of you consider yourself people who can transform and create positive changes for the world and other people, and we can transform the life of other people. And so it's very important to be aware of this and to carry on with discussions and to find tribes as people look at the same place in order to create and launch this. And so thank you very much. It was a pleasure being here with you.
Muito feliz de ter esse espaço de colaboração, de contribuição.
So it's great having this collaboration conversation. I think that's what I'm missing in the middle. So I'm going to invite you to sit down a while, and so we're going to start a discussion. And the intention is to talk a little bit about this. I think it is important to hear the perspective that you brought after the last debate, because I think that we have a bias of reflecting in the world always from our viewpoint. And the perfect example of this, I am full of apparent privileges. I'm a man, I'm white, I'm lucky to have education, but one of my characteristics, I'm homosexual, which is differs from the norm, and so this gives me a capacity to create empathy with groups. Sometimes I'm more marginalised, and sometimes we fall into the temptation of saying, maybe that's not the way it is. This no longer exists. It's no longer a problem, or if it is, it's not so important to them. And so the reality of the data, when we analyse them, show that there are communities, people, ethnic groups, which are marginalised in our society. And making this parallelism between Portugal and Brazil, which is very difficult to do because we're talking about a country which is 24 times bigger than Portugal in terms of population and 96 times bigger in terms of size, but there are characteristics which bring us together. The language, common history, imposed by the Portuguese. So I think it's important to reflect on this. The Black Girl Institute, and I hear this a lot when I go to schools and I talk about homophobic bullying. So why don't you talk about homophobic bullying? Why don't you talk about bullying in general? So homophobic bullying talks about 40%. Nobody talks about these 40%. So when, for example, we try and talk about talk in general, we forget the specific. And so the question I leave you is, why does the Black Girl Institute and not just the Girls Institute? So that's this question. Firstly, because Brazil is a country with the majority of black people, and so this number has increased over time. There were about 40 odds, so if you but now people are stating they are black and they are women in their majority. So when a black woman, the whole society moves with them. So we are the group that's greatly affected by the problems of society. I mean, look at the pandemic and the women who suffer violence. So the black women suffering from either racial and interconnected gender, and so that's very important. And so all the social tensions that exist, the first group was affected by black women, and they talk about this as diversity and inclusion, and we talk about gender or race, and I have to choose, for example, wait a minute, today I'm a black woman, no, I'm a woman, so I have to choose. So you have to have this connection. Intersectionality. I'm hetero, but that's another question, because for my generation that doesn't make much sense. So I'd have to choose another box, and so society always wants to put people into little boxes, and they act the way we think. So why black girls? Because we understand the social role that the black woman has, and has to be changed for the rest to change too. So if we're going to look at the family leaders in Brazil, most of them are black women, single mothers, and they are going to rule. And so why today am I talking to you today, and am I doing all this? Because I had a mother, a single mother, black, who had the opportunity to direct me, and so you can see.
Sistêmica e trabalhando com a base da pirâmide social.
What could happen if there were more women doing this? And so we have to work with the whole population of the periphery. But that's what is interesting. It's called the Black Girls Institute, and it's a black girls have the greater difficulty in accessing to people. So we have to tell them that they have the opportunity to be educated. So we have to get to them. And so there's a subconscious understanding to imagine where they have a place. So I'm going to open questions to the audience. I love talking about these issues, and I think there is a power in storytelling and to share stories. Because quite often the stories that we think concern ourselves only, they often reflect many of the people here present. And giving you a personal example. I moved to Lisbon in 2016, and I always worked by Gewalt. And so I had rented a room in Gewalt because after the age of 29, in 2020, I decided that I'm a little bit sick of this, of living in a room. I need an apartment. I found the right room. I managed to pay it, an apartment rather. I had good income at the time, and so perfect. I looked at the documents, and then I decided what to do. When I developed the proof of income, which is more than sufficient to pay the rent, but I said very transparently that I worked in a gay hotel. I was the executive director of an LGBT association, and so I worked in the area of inclusion for companies. The person who had the date set for to sign the contract never answered the phone call. And I remember at the time, this is the first slap in the face, and I understood that I'm a victim of the discrimination, but I can't prove it. I had income, and so I had to spend 2 months later, I decided to buy my own house. And this shows a tiny part of the microaggressions that exist. And tell you the story. I'm going to ask the audience if they want to ask any question or make comments. We have a question here. Good luck. Hello. I would like to ask Isabelle. When you talked about the difficulty you have in reaching these young black girls, if you could, I feel the same difficulty in another case, which has got to do with the parents of people with disabilities, and I would like to know I would like to ask whether it's possible to share some strategies that you use to fight this lack of perspective or notion. So people, and we know we have to act with these people, but they don't feel this need or this awareness. How do you overcome this? First of all, they're not aware of this because it's a world that they don't know. And so when we go that, we say, look, I would like to develop your potential for opportunities. What opportunities? What do you mean? Because what they know, what these people know, is what they live on every day. They live with people who work in the same place. They live in the same context every single day. So it's a world to which it's presented in front of them. What we do, we are going to these people, so where they study, where they work, and so we take examples of people who came from there, and so they came from the periphery. Did you forget the periphery? No. That is people who came from these more vulnerable contexts and are now in a different condition. They work good, so they can tell stories. And people believe in stories. And so when they look and see it's real. And so we do a lot for this movement to inspire through real stories. And so people who start from the same place. And so what we understand is that we start off with 30 people. If 30 people came, over time, half exists, 5 is good, and the 15 that left, and they said, yeah, it's true, and then they come back. And this shows that it's possible that they do deserve, because when you go to school and you so what's your value? You show your value and you want this potential for them to be able to be developed. So that's the main strategy that we use.
Mais alguma questão?
Any more questions?
Dá para ouvir? Ah, tá. Melhor microfone. Então.
Microfone melhor. Para ficar para a posteridade.
Pronto. Gostaria de parabenizar por essa
I'd like to congratulate you for this initiative. I have a friend in Brazil, black, and you know what it is to get to these places. I've worked with her, and so they were all looked at differently, and differently from the way they looked at me. And I always felt to this. I think she was very upset about that. But today, she looks at the studies. She studies. She lives here, and she became a doctor. Nowadays, she went into the faculty of medicine in Brazil through the quota, and she's a quota to get in, and she's got one of the best marks. You can't, you have to have good marks, and so this makes a difference. And she, I don't know how I'm going to explain, says the lady. I was treated differently in restaurants, and the waiter wouldn't look at her face, he'd look at mine. When I came to Portugal, she suffered a lot, not only through racism, xenophobia, saying that they were not going to speak slow with me, rather I suffered. And I had to understand that I was in their country, and my neighbours told me to go back to the shack. I'm not even from the shacks. I worked in a community, social residence, but it was not favela. And my neighbours who do not know me say this. And so when I got here and I was faced with all this, I saw how they felt. And you see this type of reality. So everybody said one thing. And today, she's in the faculty. I didn't catch what the lady said. I'm from the south of Brazil. It was an excellent opportunity because I was born in the middle of people like that. So I'm going to answer from back to front, as I said. We have this overall vision. We understand that this is a problem. It happens in Brazil, São Paulo, but it's a problem which happens in many places. And so we I'm going to answer this. What you've just said is very real. It's in a group of 20 odd grant holders and the poor. I was the only black girl. The very layers of racism, biases and prejudice, etc. And our potential was so we were talking about a number of microaggressions. How many times have I heard you were first place in your class? I mean, you're not that black. So this is a microaggression that we hear, and you're black, but and this is already mentioned in the previous panel, and so this is a place that if we don't understand, rationally understand what this means as a transformer, it's going to be very difficult because our experiences as a whole affect us all, because we began to question the number of things as value, and so I understand that when we started creating collective transformations, to change the status quo is going to be realer. This is a process, and we're at the beginning, and we have to move forward. This is a racial quotas in Brazil. There was a public policy created where black people, indigenous people have social quotas too. To have access to public universities we can manage, and people have a quota to get in, but you have no criteria. You must have good marks, and so this was a question. But it's which has been questioned, as I mentioned at the beginning of my talk. And so as I mentioned that story that the labour market didn't accept the black population, but people look at favelas at the periphery, outskirts. Most of them are black, and so this is symptomatic of how Brazil was created with the policies at the time, and so these racial and social quotas were created as a historical reparation, because only in 2050 odd black people would actually get into the universities. And so if we can see a little bit, if we can see more people in the labour market, this will be a consequence of the policy. So we have a long way to go. Thank you. Unfortunately, our time has come to an end. We don't have, but I'm going to give you the opportunity, if you want to say something else, to make a final declaration. If not, I would like to thank you very much, and once again, I'd like a round of applause for Isabelle, and a round of applause to all you who managed to stay so long. Thank you very much for making this effort, Culturgest, Fidelidade, and all the speakers. And so now we can start the discussion, because change is not done in a day or an afternoon. It is done on a daily basis through our communities, and this challenge has been launched. And so what are you going to change? Not today, but tomorrow. And the day after tomorrow. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Só para, acho que, fechar assim, é desconfortável falar sobre esses temas todos, né? Então, a única coisa que eu diria é se coloquem na posição de se sentirem desconfortáveis. Eu não estou falando, porque é uma...
So try and feel uncomfortable. Try and feel uncomfortable. There's many things, but the more uncomfortable we feel, then we have a greater value. So don't be afraid of discomfort. And so that's what we'll get with. So thank you very much again.